Nothing in this podcast is intended as investment advice, and the people in this podcast may hold positions in the stocks they talk about. Do not buy any investment based solely on a tip or recommendation. Please do your own research.
Hello and welcome to the Midweek Takeaway. It's Wednesday the 29th of January. I'm Phil Carroll.
I'm Kevin Hornsby.
And I'm Charles Archer.
So how is everyone? How's everyone bearing up? Nearly in February.
Yeah, good. Plenty of
feel-
news.
Sun's in my eyes, guys.
Sun's in your eyes. Stop
you're
rubbing
right.
it in. Is that all you
I'm
talk
having to-
about? You just want to rub
I'm
it in?
having to
Just got a
squint.
sun down. I've been pissing down with rain for the past 6 weeks. And
Storm Hermione or whatever it's come in on from
That's
Spain.
right. I've just been for a walk by the Mediterranean, and my two dogs got attacked by a German Shepherd dog. So that was good fun.
That's not fun.
That was awesome. But how are we feeling about the market? So are we starting to see a bit of the sort of bit of positivity coming back in? I'm starting to see stocks moving up. I'm seeing, a lot of buzz on X. What are your thoughts on the feelings now of the market?
I think the optimism is coming back finally. Eventually it had to. But I think it's a couple of things. It's Trump and his pushing for American exceptionalism, but whether that's like mining or biotechs or whatever else. But it's also, the AI bubble and the DeepSeek thing. People aren't particularly feel as safe in the large cap stocks as they did, only a few days ago.
Mm.
And you've seen it over the month of January, how many stocks have just doubled or tripled, overnight. You're getting that sentiment buzz back, aren't we?
I mean, so let's just look at that. I mean, there's a couple of news items that are well worth a discussion. The first one you just alluded to is obviously DeepSeek, this Chinese AI startup, which has introduced an AI model that is pretty much matches or even exceeds the likes of ChatGPT, which OpenAI, which is pretty much the same model, a significantly lower cost. I mean, there was talk that there was only something along the lines of $6 million of US dollars equivalent of investment into this, which called DeepSeek R1. Very few resources put into it, and it only uses 2000 Nvidia H800 GPUs, which obviously led to a massive sell-off in the tech stocks in the US that we witnessed, particularly affecting Nvidia. And we saw the Nvidia stock plummet at 17%, which wiped off sort of nearly $600 billion in market cap due to investor concerns over, I guess, their efficiency, potentially reducing demand for these higher end GPUs that Nvidia, use or that OpenAI use within that chipset. So ultimately there was, it has obviously recovered since then as Nvidia's stock price, and also the S&P 500 has bounced back above the 6,000 level. So what do you make of that? And I had a little bit of a play with the app on Tuesday when it was released on Monday, but I downloaded it, and basically I just wanted to test it to see how quick it was, and it was actually really impressive in terms of the interface was pretty slick. It returned everything that I asked it. I did have a play, and I asked it a simple question, which was, what happened at Tiananmen Square? And this is what it came back with. It said, "I'm sorry, I cannot answer that question. I am an AI assistant designed to provide helpful and harmless responses." So it does feel like the app is, or the model there is preloaded with kind of content restrictions and maybe biases, particularly concerning, what could be construed as a politically sensitive topic in China. What do we make of that? That an AI model that is already being kind of pre-programmed, Charles and Kev, with a sort of set of rules that governs it?
Well, I think anything that's live in China, it has to go through the Chinese Communist Party, and they're effectively they're great firewall, but B, they're censorship. So no one should take that to any great surprise. I would say, well, China is is a communist country that sets its own rules. ChatGPT and Gemini in the West has its own bias and own agendas that you possibly can't even understand or see if you've grown up in a Western culture. You may not even know them. In terms of, the $6 million cost, I mean that, it's pretty clear that there's no way they did it for that little amount of money. And obviously there's plenty of reasons for China in general to lie and to undermine, the US artificial intelligence. But regardless of any of that, right, and whether DeepSeek actually is using, Nvidia's most advanced chips that's just shipped through to Singapore, for example, this does feel like a canary in the coal mine moment. If you're talking, $600 billion getting wiped off Nvidia in the space of a few hours, how much is that valuation is actually real? Yeah. It feels to me like we're finally going to get to the point, whether it's this or something else, there will be another bubble pop. And for me in particular, the fact that DeepSeek was launched on Trump's inauguration day, and then kind of marketed really aggressively over the weekend over an American holiday suggests to me this is the first salvo in a wider battle, and it wouldn't surprise me to see something else come up next. I mean, what do you think, Kev?
Yeah, I mean, Nvidia. I mean, if you look at all of those different companies, the simple price earnings ratios on them are absurd. You know, for the size of the size of the companies and the amount that they actually are going to generate. I mean, we had this conversation about Tesla over the last number of years as well. How is Tesla worth more than all of the other car manufacturers in the entire world? Now the reality is that they're not just car manufacturers, but even so, it is so highly valued for what potentially it's going to do in the future. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And we had this discussion, I think, on the last roast week. A lot of this investing that is effectively just investing in the S&P 500 or the Dow or whatever it happens to be is led to invest in these stocks. So it wasn't a big shock that the day after it dropped 17% or whatever, it then came back 8 or 9% because it's almost an inevitability. More money will keep pouring into it because of these people who are basically investing hands off, if you like.
Yeah,
Um,
I think
there's
you're
obviously
right.
got to be opportunities, hasn't there? There's obviously got to be
Mm,
opportunities to trade things like that. And I think what you're going to probably is there's going to be a lot more trading and volatility. If you saw the VIX, which is sort of a close analysis of what happens with volatility, it went through the roof that day. You could have money on that VIX, I think, on that day. Now it's obviously dropped way back again now, but I think we're going to have a year of more volatility, and that steps into what we discussed before we came on, which was how many stocks in our small cap area have done 100% or more since the beginning of January. How many was it?
I checked on SharePad for stocks that had since the 2nd of January, which was the first trading day of the year, and there were circa 10 stocks that have done 100% and more. I mean, obviously, one of the biggest performers was Finu or Bank, which we've talked about before, which had done sort of 1280%, so circa 13x on the on the year start of the year. But I think you made a good statement, Kev, that they're the ones that have actually held on to those gains. You could probably double the number, if not triple the number, that have actually done 100% and not held on, that are sitting around the sort of 70, 60, 50% mark now. So there is that. But there's one other thing I want to mention about AI and everything like that, which I saw a really interesting point, and that's a lot of artists now, musicians, journalists, and filmmakers are very concerned about, certainly in the UK, and it will go worldwide, that AI is potentially going to be given the freedoms to scrape all content, all basically artistic content from, Spotify and all the platforms that host music and films and Netflix, and effectively take that without any royalties paid to be able to manipulate or replicate songs. So, for instance, Paul McCartney was on this week, interviewed, concerned about this. What do we make of that? The fact that artists will not be given royalties based on the fact and allowing AI to scrape and have access to artistic rights. I mean, firstly, should it be allowed? And secondly, how much is that going to discourage people from actually releasing records if they're not going to be paid anything for those royalties?
Well, I think it's kind of inevitable that it's going to and is already happening. I mean, even for me as a writer, how long is it going to be before you just plug into ChatGPT or DeepSeek, write an article on this subject in the style of Charles Archer? You know, but
It's not going to happen, Charles. You're not that good.
no, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm not, but that's not the point, is it?
I'm joking.
We're gonna
I'm
get there
joking.
soon, or like, for example, record a roast PR podcast on the small cap market. You know,
Yeah. Well,
create
that's
it for
easily
you for 2
copied.
hours.
That's it. That's not a big deal.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, it was funny. I did an article on DeepSeek on Substack earlier this week. It was really, really popular. There's a couple of swear words in there and a little bit of sort of like personality in it. And I think that's going to be the difference, right? Because like when I look at like SEO and Google and just in general like creating stuff, all of the kind of boring stuff artificial intelligence can create better than any person can. But anything that requires any kind of like personal analysis, it can't do it at all. It doesn't have personality yet.
They can't add a quip in about, something, can they? Like, I see you put in quite a few little quips and synonym, similes and things like that, and I chuckle at some of them.
Well, they can't.
Because ultimately
do it
they don't understand that AI, but it will learn to understand that. That's the problem.
That's the problem. It's where we get to like AGI, or where we get to a point where it can create something that passes for human, right? Like a Turing test. If you look at like ChatGPT, like I don't use it in my own work at all because it just doesn't. It has no personality at all, and then the writing itself is kind of boring and not worth reading. And it's the same.
You can tell straight away it's been generated by
AI.
100%. Them all being pushed on Twitter, don't you? And read them and go, "This is old news. This isn't even relevant to the stock that we're talking about."
You read
even the spoken stuff, you can tell very, very clearly. It used 6 months ago. It was like blatantly obvious. Now maybe you have to listen a tiny bit before you realize this is AI. But just coming back to your point about use of everybody's data. Okay, because AI doesn't work if you don't use the data. It only learns from other people's stuff. So it's basically the best guy in the class, but he's cheated from everybody else. So I listened to a podcast. Maybe you want to look it up. The Tucker Carlson show it was, and there was a guy called Sakira Balaji who worked as an engineer for Sam Altman building the AI, and he basically decided that Altman was committing crimes by basically scraping all of this information and using stuff that he wasn't supposed to. And he became a whistleblower. And shock horror, he was found dead in his apartment.
Yeah.
And they classed it as suicide. And his mother is basically saying there was no way it was suicide. There was blood all over the apartment. Anyway, you can listen to the podcast. It was January the 16th. I found it fascinating. But basically, he was obviously part of the engineers. He was a very talented guy. And he basically turned around and said, "You can't do this. You're stealing everybody's information."
Yeah.
And they were like, "No, just get on with it and do it." So, and do you reckon the Chinese care about anybody's copyrights?
No.
They never have. No. But I mean, it makes me laugh though, because it's funny. Because, for example, you're talking about like data and the way it scrapes. Reddit is a good example, right? Artificial intelligence chatbots, they scrape Reddit and they scrape Twitter and they scrape LinkedIn to get data. And yet it seems more and more of the posts on Reddit and Twitter and LinkedIn are created using chatbots. So the chatbots are actually not learning. This is partially why I think they're getting dumber, because they're just learning from themselves.
Yeah, they're learning from dumb people who are posting on
who dumbed it down and they dumbed themselves down.
Shit in, shit out, basically.
But
the interesting thing is that one of the companies today came out and said we're using this AI because it's much cheaper. It's going to save us a fortune, etc., etc.
What Cycle was it?
Yeah, Cycle.
AI. Yeah.
But the interesting thing with both UK, European, and I think US. This means that they can no longer be certified for data protection. I'm sure of it, because ultimately you're not securing the data for the clients. So though it seems like a win, I don't see how they're going to qualify. I mean, I was having a conversation with the guys in Priority AI about how it affects them, and they were saying, well, we could switch in half an hour if we wanted to, everything. But the fact of the matter is, we wouldn't qualify for our certification. So the interesting thing is the whole thing about AI to me is a grab of information or a grab of data. Yes. So the winners in this game are going to be the ones, just like Facebook, just like Amazon, just like Apple, who have effectively collated the most data and can then use that data to the benefit of whoever pays as much money as they can. And AI is going to be no different.
That's what we'll see. We'll see. I don't know. I mean, on the flip side of that, I mean, I kind of look at AI, artificial intelligence, in its current use space. And yes, it's useful. Does it justify the massive valuations? Nvidia, for example, is worth well more than every mining company in the world, right? Like, I'm not entirely sure that the artificial intelligence valuations on the large scale are justified by what it can currently do. Maybe in the future, but everyone's kind of betting on the future where AI has infiltrated the entire world. I'm not sure it's going to be that useful.
Yeah. Nvidia at least has a product, okay? So it's not just, because
No, it's
Nvidia
picks and shovels
effectively is
though.
making the chips.
Well, no,
So
it's not. I mean, Nvidia is using the chipset from Taiwan and effectively building the GPUs. It's actually reselling someone else's product in a different package. So it's not true that they're actually manufacturing it. I mean, they've got obviously the software IP, but effectively
no,
it's
but
a
that's what I mean. They've got the
yeah,
IP for the chip.
yeah.
Yeah, someone else is manufacturing it. Yes, I
Well, I
agree.
think
But that
the
that
the
that's no difference than somebody designing something and then it's being built somewhere else. I mean, I don't think that's a major issue.
well, you saw that
It's
Trump's putting tariffs on Taiwan on the chip making, isn't he? Because the
Yeah.
US now has their own ones, so that could be an interesting story down the line. But I don't know. I think the sort of the idea that Nvidia is kind of has this unassailable moat, and DeepSeek comes along, and yes, whether you believe the narrative or not, actually it might be the case that the best AI models don't need the most advanced chips, or
Yeah.
maybe it could be the case. Like I made the comparison to Cisco earlier this week, where in the dot-com bubble, exactly the same sort of thing. They produce masses and masses of hardware for all of these dot-com companies. All the dot-com companies collapsed, and then there was just a huge flood of Cisco hardware all out in the world.
Mm.
What happens if the same thing happens here? Artificial intelligence bubble pops. There's masses of Nvidia hardware out there. Then they don't have a customer base to sell to because the second-hand market's flooded.
It could absolutely fall quicker than it was created. That's for sure. Because I mean, Nvidia if you read back at some of the history of it, they were very much like 1 or 2 months away from bankruptcy before they got these deals. I remember seeing interviews with the CEO,
Yeah,
and they,
yeah.
they were literally having meetings,
Oh, same
emergency
as
meetings.
Apple, same as
Exactly, same as
Amazon.
that. Exactly
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
All these big companies have to go through some sort of real shocker events, and they've bounced back. But absolutely, I mean, it has been that little blip that we saw, and I'll call it a blip because I don't believe it was an AI bubble bursting. I
Not
think there's a
yet,
long,
no.
long way to go yet. So I'm not calling it, but it has been likened to the .com, the start of the .com. But again, I don't think it was just a temporary blip, and you could argue that it could have actually increased. The immediate market reactions were negative, but potentially positive implications for the future because it's drawn kind of further innovation and demand in the AI sector, is the way I see it, the whole DeepSeek thing.
Well,
yeah.
sure, but then you mentioned the bubble, right? Okay. So on the 27th of January, just a couple of days ago, the S&P 500 lost 1.5% and it's now recovered. But more than 300 of the stocks rose, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So this has never happened before since the modern inception, 1957. And the only day where more than 250 advanced, but the index as a whole fell, was in April 1999 twice and April 2000 as the
Yeah.
dot-com bubble burst.
Interesting.
So,
I like it. I like it. There's
does
a lot of
history repeat?
similarities.
Does it rhyme?
But
The thing is, I'm
this
not
was
worried.
this was no, this was the comparison that I was going to make, right? Because I started to think to myself, is Nvidia, worth several trillion dollars? Okay, and it's not the only company that's worth several trillion dollars because there's a few of them now. And I looked up what is the total value of the London Stock Exchange, right? Total value of all shares on the London Stock Exchange is
Hmm.
3.42 trillion pounds.
Yeah.
So just let that sink in. Nvidia is worth thereabouts the same value as every stock listed on the London Stock Exchange.
Hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
So
How?
the question is, do you want to buy the London Stock Exchange share group,
And
or do you
everything
want to
on
buy
it.
and everything on it, or do you want to buy Nvidia? Which one do you
So,
think?
so then I'll say to you, which one is overvalued or is one massively undervalued?
Well, I think both. One is massively overvalued and one is massively undervalued.
Yeah, I agree.
And somewhere between the two is where we go. And I mean, I think that's what's happened also in January is some cash has started to come into the UK market because it is bloody cheap.
Right,
It
hold
is
that
really
thought.
cheap.
Hold that thought. That's a really good segue. So, talking about cash coming into companies and into the market, great RNS in the week. And I love seeing this. Basically, Cornish Metals, they recently secured a significant investment from the British government's National Wealth Fund as part of a £56 million fundraising initiative. So basically, we saw that RNS. I mean, what did you make? It's the first time I've ever seen effectively, this British government's National Wealth Fund invest. They invested £28.6 million into Cornish Metals, which is going to support the revival of that historic South Crofty tin mine in Cornwall. and it's a part of a broader £56 million fundraise round for the company, and obviously contributions from the existing shareholder Vision Blue Resources, who are a cornerstone investor. I mean, how encouraging is that to see? I mean, we met the Cornish tin and all the Cornish lithium guys at the Resourcing Tomorrow, and I think you had a chat with them, Charles, and they had a specific corner, didn't they? Like the Cornish corner, and it was brilliant. So, what do you make of that news?
I think it's fantastic news. It's the idea, 56 million in fundraising, in this market for mines in the UK, almost unheard of, really. I think it's really worth bearing in mind this strategic investment by the National Wealth Fund, which is wholly owned by HMRC, right? And so these millions of pounds they're pumping in, it's not like grant funding. It's not designed to, it's actually designed to make like a return on the investment and generate wealth for the country. And so this tin mine doing well. I mean, it bodes well for the other operators in Cornwall. And I would say Tungsten West, which is the second largest tungsten deposit in the world, just north of Plymouth, just down the road from me, they've got an excellent asset and they just need a bit of cash. So it wouldn't surprise me to see others in the region also start to benefit from this money. But beyond that, the other thing is it just speaks to the scale now. I mean, Trump is doing the same thing in the US and Europe and Australia. That critical minerals, you need your own supply.
Yeah.
You need your own supply domestically, and you're going to have to pay up now, having not done so for 40 years. It's going to get very expensive.
Yeah,
but it's excellent news for them, obviously, excellent news for the sector as a whole.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that bringing on tungsten as well, as we know at the time, with when it's on effectively on the export ban, and we've talked extensively about Guardian, UK having an extensive source of tungsten at this time is fantastic. I mean, the thing to look at is the job creation. It's expected to create over 300 jobs, so the government should be absolutely encouraging this sort of investment. You're going to boost the local economy in Cornwall. Let's face it, is been smashed down a lot. And also what the plans are with the money is they're going to refurbish the mine, obviously shaft refurbishment. We were talking to the director about this when we were there, and also the dewatering, with the goal to restart operations by the end of 2027. But I mean, how many other operations are there? You've mentioned tungsten, you mentioned, Cornish tin, Cornish lithium, but there must be another 10, 15 assets like this that could be getting going around the country.
Well, there's tons. I mean, the problem is again, it's exactly the same whether you go to like Portugal with Barroso or Serbia with the lithium thing with the jade mine. It's the same in the UK. No one wants a mine in their backyard, right? And yet there's quite a strong appetite for renewable energy, for example. And it's the same whether it's a mine or windmills or solar panels or anything else. We want it, but we don't want the infrastructure for it. But yeah, I think Cornwall and Wales, both of them, masses and masses and masses of demand. And I guess it's funny though, because we have, at the same time we're doling out grant funding for Cornwall to go off like tin and tungsten and things, we kind of have crippled the North Sea and have decided not to go for our own oil and gas, instead importing it from abroad for more money. It's just madness.
Yeah, I mean, that segues onto energy pathways. I mean, obviously we talked about DESN as the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. So just give us your thoughts on, that sort of segues nicely into that, because we talked about the Marham Energy Storage Hub there up on the North Sea mesh, and obviously we've seen them having the facility to draw down on the money, but they've obviously working towards the feed, the front end engineering design, and then obviously pre-feed studies. What do you make of that in terms of the demand now? Obviously, Rough has been saying that there's only effectively a week's worth of gas in there. We're very much in need of it. We're too dependent on importing of gas. How important is this mesh?
Well, the Rough story is simple. Is that the company behind it, the major behind it, wants government funding, right? So it's just a game of political football until, there's some kind of compromise. I would say in terms of energy storage, I mean, we don't have enough of it. So, mesh is well positioned. It would not surprise me to see some kind of similar grant funding going towards energy pathways at some point in the future. They're perfectly positioned, and it's just a waiting game now, I think. But we need more energy storage in the UK. I think this is kind of obvious to anybody. And what's surprising to me more than anything else is that mesh is one of the leaders and is just a small microcap, right? You'd think that the bigger companies would be getting behind it, but they're not. I guess the only question with mesh, I mean, the number they put out for sort of getting it up and running was sort of 70 million-ish, wasn't it? Off the top of my head. This seems quite low, so you'd have to go through those numbers again. But if that is accurate, then it's a very attractive proposition.
Yeah, that was the number, I think, to effectively get the gas. So when it first came to market, it was about the Mariam gas project really only. But since then, obviously, they've turned it into 25-year storage as opposed to gas release over 5 or 6 years. So, obviously, the gas is still going to be extremely profitable. And as we've seen in January with either low wind or crazy wind, we've been in a situation where the wind farms have either created way too much or have created none. And so that's played into the hand of massed energy now in terms of their progress in terms of trying to create these gas peakers, which is, it's all an interconnected system, isn't it? We need energy pathways, we need a massed energy, and various others. So if massed energy can grow its megawatts up to the 300 megawatts that I talked about over the next couple of years, that's going to be just a huge utility company paying huge dividends. It
Yeah.
really is going to be very exciting. And Energy Pathways is exactly the same thing. I think there's going to be massive capital growth in the share if this all gets off the ground. But then it's going to become like a utility play. It's going to be, your just gas play utility, which the pension funds and everybody else are going to be begging to take 10%, 20%, whatever for the pension funds because they'll just be an annuity effect.
Well,
So yeah.
I think it's well positioned. I think it could do really well. And then I guess it's just waiting for news flow now, isn't it? I think, I haven't looked at the share price recently, but it's sort of just trotting along. I think there's very few buyers or sellers. People are just waiting now for the next news to drop.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those ones, isn't it? As you said, Phil, there's a lot have gone up, though that one had a big
Had a
rise
run,
last
didn't
year.
it? Yeah.
It went straight to 12 or 13p, I think, after the budget. I think it was around 12p, and now it's settling in
like
and
one and
around
a half. Trading at one and a half
8p.
p for a long time, like literally 1.5p, and then it went up to it
Yeah.
almost did 10x. So it's done extremely well. I mean, let's have a look at the movers of the week. I mean, the biggest one that I've seen really, on it hasn't really held on to all the gains, but certainly doing very well was Immupharma. They moved up from 4p to 7p at the start of the week, and then came the usual speeding ticket, as they like to be referred to. We know of no reason for the share price movement. They are currently trading at 5p levels, and we caught up with Tim McCarthy last week on the road, so he talked all about their P140 product there for obviously autoimmune disease, and it's really interesting listening. Actually, it looks like they've got a very, very good product in phase 3 clinical trials right now. Anything
What
else?
do you mean we know of no reason? They were on the roast.
Yeah.
I know. It's fun when you have to say that, isn't it?
Jonathan Swan always says to me, well, you're guaranteed the share's going to go down if you go on the roast. But no, things are changing.
Yeah.
It's things are starting to turn around that when people start to see, ooh, there's value in this, then yeah. And we've got a great guest this coming Sunday. In fact, two great guests this coming Sunday. So watch this space. They're going to be in the tech space as well. So yeah, look out for it.
What about Helix Exploration? I saw a really good X post from them, from the CEO, Bo Sears at Rudyard, and he was basically there was a guy on site, and he was turning basically a winder. It's effectively a valve on it looks like a blow off valve on the wellhead, and he was effectively releasing 2,000 psi of gas pressure of the helium at the the Rudyard at Prospect, and it was actually impressive to see this release. And he probably only turned it about a tenth of the way, because obviously I wouldn't want to release 2,000 psi. Probably quite a dangerous thing to be doing. I don't know if you saw that, Charles, but what
I did. I don't know. My first thought was stop wasting our fucking gas. We spent enough money drilling for this shit. That's expensive stuff. Bottle it and sell it. We're waiting. What are you doing?
You'd have had your head over it, giving it the old Mickey Mouse, wouldn't you?
Well, I think just like pop a balloon over it. What are you talking about? This is obviously it's a great video and it's great marketing, and it's sometimes we're so disconnected from like the actual physical story.
Yeah.
But there's no better proof the gas is there than like hearing the sound of it coming out of the ground, right? But yeah,
somebody behind him going.
Someone behind him with like a big paper bag ready to blast. Like an explosion.
Yeah, no, I think Helix I've been covering pretty much since the IPO, and they're one of my favorite ones, just because of the management team that they have behind them. Yeah. And now they've secured a plant process its helium, so it's just, again, I think it's a case of wait a few months, get the cash flow running, and then it should start rising again. And still up 50% since the IPO as well. So yeah, happy days.
Okay, and yeah, I mean the other good RNS this week was an update from Ethereum related to the Rio Tinto drilling update in Rwanda. Effectively, they've drilled 2 holes there at the HCK project, and they are obviously they're advancing on the 3rd hole, and then they're obviously going to await the assays results. But Charles Bray, the chairman, highlighted and commented the collaborative efforts of the team and the partners teams who've worked tirelessly to ensure the success of this exploration campaign. So yeah, nice to see an update. Obviously, it'd be good to await the results of those assays. But yeah, good to see progress and an update from Rio on that joint venture.
Yeah, they're going to be at Indaba. They announced their stall number. I think it was E39, but I don't remember exactly. But if you look on LinkedIn, you can see it. So I'll be catching up with those guys next week. Going to be watching the Spurs versus Liverpool versus Spurs semi-final, second leg, with Charles, who's a big Spurs fan. So yeah, let's see how that all works out.
Good.
As Spurs seem to be capitulating as we speak.
Yeah, very good. Okay, anything else anyone want to mention?
Nope.
No, good.
Okay, well, thanks for listening. If you like what we heard, please subscribe, hit the bell icon for any further notifications of future episodes, and have a great day.
This podcast was brought to you by Roast PR Limited. If you would like to appear on a future episode of The Sunday Roast, please email admin@thesundayroast.net.